Here we go. Right, I think we're ready to start our 12 o'clock demonstration. Gives me great pleasure, look at the packed house we've got here. Gives me great pleasure to introduce Halima Cassell, who's going to be demonstrating for the next 45 minutes. And I'm going to just ask Halima if she's going to tell us what she plans to do in this morning's demonstration. Over to you, Halima.
Okay, I'm not sure if my demonstration will be as exciting as Adam's, which is very visual and, it's happening really fast. With my kind of work, it's kind of paring away at the clay. So it's just carving the clay, talking about the project I'm working on, which is in the exhibition in the gallery, in the main gallery. And just to talk about the processes that I go through when working. So at the moment, what I do is carving the clay, but you're almost paring it away with because you don't know what angles or what depths you're going to be working in. So yeah, hopefully that's what I'll be talking about.
Great. So we've got a fancy new camera angle this year from above, which we're going to really try and utilize in this session, because otherwise it's quite hard to see what Halima is doing from the side when she's carving down into the vessels. So hopefully that will give you the angles that you need for this session as we move around. And obviously we're very happy to take any questions from the floor, but please, and I say this to you as well, Halima, let me repeat the question before you answer it for anyone who doesn't hear the question.
Yeah.
And we're straight off with a question. Okay, so the question is, do you draw the design first, or is it coming out of your head as you're working, I presume?
Yes, I have a design. I've actually forgot my design book is in there, but I have a design book which I draw into, and when I choose the design, I map it onto the piece like this one, which has been mapped on. So there's a grid, and then my design is equally mapped around the piece. And then all the carving and angles that I carve into the piece are done by eye and feel. And with this particular series of work, both the inside and outside are carved. So I have to consider what I'm doing inside and outside. So I always start off with the inside and then carve the outside. So depending what angles I'm doing in the inside, I then go in the opposite direction on the outside. So constructively is a sound piece.
And we have a couple more questions. This one here. Okay, so presumably, the question is that presumably that is a solid piece of clay that you're working on there. And
Yep.
how hard is it when you're starting?
In
I presume the carving.
Leather hard and completely dry, but by the time I get to the final touches, is almost dry completely. And the reason for that is, as I'm working on it and the hours that I spend on it, the clay is constantly drying. So at the moment, it's just past leather dry. You spend as much time finishing it as you do carving it. So at the moment, this is the easy bit, which you're just working out all the angles and directions. And then after that, you work out all the depths you can carve into, depending how thick your form is. And then once you've carved all you want to carve, then you spend as much time smoothing it, burnishing it, and getting all the angles really smooth.
Another question.
And we have a question right up in the middle here. Yeah.
You work with a lot of different clay materials, clay bodies to work on. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you, the artist, where that came from, the idea?
Okay, so the question is about working, and I know this is something very close to your heart and you're happy to talk about, but working with all the different clay bodies from all over the world, and what that means to you.
It's really exciting working with the different clays, and I'm nervous as well because you can spend all those hours into a piece and not know what's going to be happening. Because especially with this clay, it's really quite nice to carve this clay. This particular clay is from Bosnia, so it's got a lot of plastic feel to it, but it has got lots of stones and sandy bits in it, so I don't know how that's going to react. And so yeah, each one's a surprise because I don't know what colour it's going to fire, whether it's going to withstand all the tension of the carving when it's been fired. But I feel more confident with this clay than the Ghana clay, which even handling it was a bit, it was kind of tense handling that clay. So each clay has a different property, and depending how that clay feels and how it feels when you're carving it is how deep and how intricate you go with that process of carving and finishing. But if it's a clay that you're confident with or you feel confident working with, then you work a lot more closer to the surfaces you want. When I'm doing my normal work, I work with clays that I'm more familiar with, and then I can do exactly what I want. But with these particular clays from around the world, each one has a completely different feel, and that's with that feel I respond to what I carve and what kind of finish I do on the piece.
And we have a question from the front.
Again, with the
I'll
knife.
just repeat the
sorry.
question, yeah. Sorry. After you've done the main carving, how do you finish off to get the surface, the finished surface?
I just, at the moment, I'm carving into clay, then I just fettle the clay really carefully. With the Virtues of Unity installation, none of the clay is burnished. With my normal work, I do burnish all the edges and certain parts of the carving. But with this Virtues of Unity, I just fettle it with the knife until all the surfaces and all the bumps on the clay have disappeared and have been shaved away with the pairing.
So how does the piece start? Do you put it into a mould to get that initial start of the piece?
With the clays, depending what people bring me back, whether it's 10 kilos of clay or 20 kilos of clay, all of it's hand hit into a former, and then if it needs a bit more coils to build a bit higher, I do that. But it's made, the inside is just hit very carefully, and more clay is added into it until I use whatever clay that I have got. But also being quite wary because it could be 2 inches in thickness of form, or it can be almost the entire form, but all of it's actually hit inside a former and then slightly built up as well.
A question at the back. Could you explain the firing techniques that you use?
The firing techniques, there's so many beautiful firings going on outside with different types of kilns. But me, I tend to use an electric kiln, and I like to control how fast and how slow it's going up. And normally, depending how confident I am with the clay, or what type of clay, it depends on how fast I go up or how slow. And again, with the temperatures, because some of the clay what's being got for me, there's no actual information regarding the firing. So then, again, you kind of feel how, normally you can kind of, both of these clays, this Ghana clay and this Bosnian clay, I'd fire very slowly just because of all the sediment and different stones in this clay. And this doesn't feel like a very strong clay, so I'll fire it quite slow to a very low earthenware temperature, where the clay from Korea or somewhere that a lot of potters are using it from, then which I'm more confident with and got a bit more detail about and feels a lot stronger, then I'll fire up to 1300.
Do you not bother to test fire pieces just to make sure? Or you just go straight for broke?
I go straight for the kill. um, Generally, I don't do many test firings with the clay, unless it's a clay that is literally no information about it. So when I got the clay from South Africa, it was a street artist who was making clay animals and air drying them. And this particular lady who managed to get me the clay saw him working in it and said she needed 12 kilos, and he just went to one of the rivers nearby to where they lived and just dug out the clay from the seabed. So that clay had no information. So that one I did do a little test because she said it was white clay. But it wasn't, it was actually red when I fired it. I knew it was going to be red, but I just thought I'd do a test. So something like that I might do a test firing, but normally I tend to just use as much of the clay making a shape, because normally there might be only exactly 10 kilos of clay, so using all of it inside the form for the piece is really important, not to waste any.
Do you document your sources and photograph? Do you document the source and the sort of record the process that it gets to
I
you?
do. I document by photograph before I start. I have my design book, which I document where it's from, any information, who got it me, and then I keep all the other information on the computer. It's very amateur. Which was that? Can you see it? So yeah.
I think they can go on the
Yeah.
above one.
Yeah, so I, Slovakia, it was a sister's friend who was going there to see her. And each piece is named after a virtue, which kind of sometimes relates to the country or the person who got it me, or and that. And some of them have lots of information on them, what temperature they fire and where it's from, what pottery, what artist it came from, and then all the details about the person who got the clay from the country is then collected as well. So this is these two pieces. So this is a Bosnian clay, and I don't have any information what they fire to, so I'm just going by instinct of how they feel as I'm carving them, and we'll fire them to that temperature. So these are some other pieces.
And this is what you're planning to do with the two pieces here?
Yeah, this is the Bosnian clay. This is the bottom of the piece.
So this is this one?
Yeah, this
And
is
that one
is the
going to be that one?
Ghana clay, yes. That's a bit more simple in design. So, yeah, and then whatever temperature I do fire, I'll write it down on here. And there is pieces I've done which have not been successful, but that's part of the process of working from the clays from the different countries. The clays are kindly sourced by people going out, seeing friends or family, or on holiday or on business to different countries, and they kindly bring me the clay back to go for the installation. So,
and you apply a virtue to each clay that comes back?
yeah. I mean, for me, the installation is about togetherness and belonging, and the virtues for me is, as a human race, is what connects us as a species, and it's innate in all of us that we have this instinct of caring, giving, hope, charity, and regardless of our religion, our status, our background, we have these wonderful virtues that bring us together as I was saying, as a race. And I think for me, the installation came about in 2009 when I managed to finally go to Pakistan for a residency through the various universities in Islamabad and in Karachi and Lahore. And it was wonderful going back to the country that I was born, that I thought I was going to get a warm welcoming or a feeling of belonging, because growing up in Manchester, there was like lots of various elements of, you know, being reminded that you're not from there, and so going back to Pakistan in 2009, I was really shocked, really surprised. In every institution that I went into, I was always introduced with the long title of "This is a foreigner from England, Halima Cassell," and it kind of threw me, because all these years of wanting to go back to Pakistan and having a reason to go back, which I was doing some research at the time, to go back and have this kind of realization that I didn't really even belong there. And then, so that's how the installation came about, this idea of, you know, accepting where you live is where you belong, not necessarily where your ancestors or your family or where you were born. And then realizing, you know, as a human species from the early days, we've always migrated, we've always traveled, we've always, you know, so can we really say where our home is or where we belong? And my realization was that wherever you lay your hat is your home. And I think, you know, and once we realize that we are all the same and just differ in color and texture, same like the clay bodies from the installation, that we're all the same. Yeah.
So we have a couple of
Question.
questions. We've one here, I think, has been waiting a while, and then I'll come to the front. So. Yeah. So the question really is relating, it's a technical question relating to the thickness of the clay, where you might have a couple of centimeters, and you've mentioned about firing it over a length of time. I mean, maybe an indication of that length of time, but also how, when you've got those thick centimeters, how do you avoid air, trapping air and things like that?
The trapping air, I mean, when I'm working, there's 4 different processes that I go through in all my work, and I treat them all very separately. So when I'm designing, that is a separate process. I enjoy that. I allow my mind to run free, and you know, I'm there dissecting and you know, using symmetry, using my compass. Well, not when I'm sketching, but you know, using different dissecting of the circle. So the design process is a very enjoyable stage, and where my mind kind of runs free. And then the second stage is making the form, and this is a very technical stage. I don't have any kind of other things distracting me, because that stage is really important, because when you're building such solid forms out of lumps of clay, you've got to make sure you're actually hitting them very hard and not creating any air bubbles behind them. So, so when you're hitting solid forms, you're kind of like bashing it into the form, and it, you know, you're wedging the clay, and when you're joining any coils, you've got to make sure there's no air. So the air is all eliminated in the making process of the form. And then once you've got the form made with no air bubbles, hopefully, then you spend quite a while getting it as perfect as possible. You're measuring the thickness of the rim, you're turning it around on the wheel to feel for any inconsistencies of the form inside. And then once you've got your perfect form, it makes it much easier, like a canvas for a painter, that, you know, the more time you spend trying to get a perfect form and the inside perfect, then when you come to mapping your design, it's much easier. So then the third stage I go through is choose the chosen design is then mapped into the form. So I draw a grid around my form. So there's a grid around there, and then that form, then by using compasses and various measuring tools, is then mapped into the form and outside the form. and then that's precisely done as precisely as I can do it. And then the final stage then becomes a more enjoyable stage because one, you have confidence that you've carefully built the piece, and secondly, you know, your design is mapped around as perfectly as possible, and so then you can start enjoying the carving process. And the carving process is the final process, which is a very meditative process.
What was your question? What's your firing cycle look like?
My typical firing cycle, I mean, it changes from clay to clay, but my typical firing cycle is maybe, depending how confident I'm with the clay, about 10 degrees an hour to 100, and then 20 to 400, and then maybe 25, about 25, depending how confident I'm with the clay, then about 25 to 40 degrees to 600, and then 50 degrees to 1240, 1260, 1300, depending on the clay.
That's a very slow cycle, isn't it? That's a very slow cycle. That's
We've
like,
got a question here at the front.
How did you come about finding the right tool for you? And do you just, when that finished, you just have to go and get another one?
Yeah, I've got somewhat of only like really small bits of them left.
I'll just explain the question. It's about identifying that she has a favourite tool, and how did she come about finding the tool, and when that tool expires, in a sense, how do you have to go and find another one the same?
I have quite a few tools now, but really, when I started off with really simple tools like a good knife, and the knife that I use, this particular knife is lovely, but you know, I just use even a kitchen knife, like a small kitchen knife, which I've used. So I have various knives, and with the knife you can carve, you can fettle, you can burnish, you can do so much with one tool. Even though now I have lots of tools, because I do have a sad fascination and desire to buy tools. You know, going to a tool shop or going to an antique shop, looking at some old tools, and you know, even for burnishing, you know, like fish knives and stuff like that. Finding some really old fish knives, and when you're making your big forms, you know, your butter mallets, you know, just hitting the shape into you know, the shape that you want. So my favourite tools, I always say start off with the simplest tool and use that tool as best you can in as many different ways as you can, because the more tools you have, it can confuse the process that you're doing. So if I'm ever teaching, or if I'm, you know, I always say get used to one tool rather than, it's like having lots of, it's like drawing without a rubber. You're more concentrating on what you're doing, and it's same when you have less tools, you're concentrating on using that tool properly than, you know, thinking which tool you should be using.
question here. Thank you for your experiences and values that inspire your work. Can you explain how you wound up working in this fashion?
In carving clay?
Yeah.
In carving clay. It started whilst I was at university, and I was doing a project, and I had, as you do as a young, you know, a very young 20-year-old, and I've always been intrigued by nature. I've always been in love with architecture. I've always, you know, all the things that inspired me, which were based around maths and you know, looking at buildings and looking at how they're constructed, looking at a plant and looking at the construction of a plant and the symmetry. And I think my love for maths kind of was intrigued by, by these things. And whilst doing a project at university, I kind of made 2 forms which were to resemble a situation in my personal life, with my culture, with my background, and I started carving into these pieces, and that's when I fell in love with carving, the process of carving. But the development of the work has happened over the last just over 25 years of me carving into material, and the work's developed. I mean, it was before 2006, I never used any curvy lines in my work. It was very rectilinear, it was very architectural, and then I started adding the curves into my work. So over the 25 years, the work's adapted as my confidence grown in materials or the way I work. But the carving process happened by chance through looking at looking at various architecture and looking at my own cultural background.
So would you say the geometry comes from the cultural?
Yeah, growing up in a very Muslim upbringing and looking, creating or drawing the human form was kind of almost forbidden. As we were told as we were growing up. And so I suppose the math side, the math side of thing was partly influenced by that, and it was also influenced by the 2 subjects that I excelled in at school, was maths and art. So I think they naturally came together, and looking quite closely at various cells, and looking at close-up of the different patterns you can find in snowdrops and snowflakes, and I think geometry is something that's all around us, and I think especially with virtues of unity, I think it's a very easy thing to visually digest, because it's just lots of pattern which has been carved into. And I think whether you're a child, whether you're an art lover or not, people seem to react with virtues of unity in different ways at different levels.
We had a couple of questions. I'm just coming over here to get them all. So we'll go one. We've got 2, one behind each other. The lady at the back first, please. In the black top, yeah. Lovely. So that question was, do you ever have to add clay, or is it always about taking the clay away?
It's always taking clay away. It's just the way my brain thinks. I'm always having to take clay away. When I'm building a form, I'm adding with coils or slabs or with various things, but that's just to create the canvas that I'm going to be working into. But when it comes to working with the clay, as a whole, is always taken away. And I think as the work's developed and I've looked at other materials, that's kind of made that process, if I'm working, let's say in stone or something, taken away is much easier, because that is the way I see things.
And next we have the lady who was just in front there. Yep, yep.
I was just wondering about if you slip and cut a bit away that you don't want to, can you fix it, or do you have to throw the whole thing away?
Okay, okay. So the question was, if you slip and maybe cut a bit too much away, can you fix it, or do you have to throw the piece away and start again?
I tend not to make too many mistakes, because you're not taking big chunks away, you're just paring away. So there's not much chance of making a mistake, because you're just slowly paring away at the clay. I'm not making any harsh decisions, because even with this, this is the rough carving of this piece, and then I'll do the other side, and then I'll start going deeper and taking some of these shapes in and angles or the curves in a lot deeper, or taking them in at a certain angle depending what's happening on the outside. So everything's done very slowly, so making it much more difficult to make mistakes.
Great, thank
It's a
you.
bit
There
like
was a
stone
question
carving, isn't it?
over here. Yep.
A bit like stone carving then, almost.
Stone carving, yeah, there's no way back with stone carving. And I think when I did the scholarship for stone carving, I didn't spend much time learning about carving, because the carving into clay really helped with that process. So.
The question is, you mentioned that you teach. Do you run courses, and where do you teach?
I used to do a lot of teaching. I teach once a year masterclass, and then I teach evening class from my studio once, term time only. But that's more play with clay. But the masterclass that I run once a year is again from the studio. We moved to Shropshire so that we could be. I used to in the early days. I used to do a lot of teaching and lots of workshops, but I'll be away a lot. So, and as my work's got busier, I do less, but I do enjoy the teaching side. So with the masterclass, I run from the studio once a year.
Another question on this side, and then I'll come back to the middle. Yeah, that's you. Yeah.
I see you're ambidextrous. I'm just wondering whether your brain is worked out in such a way that you can do geometric design very well.
Oh, now that's an interesting question. So it's been noted that you're ambidextrous, and they're wondering if your brain is mapped out in such a way that you can deal with the geometric patterns, constructing the geometric patterns.
I think being ambidextrous, I'm left-handed naturally, but I carve with both hands. This not only allows me to do the curves or the angles that I need to do on both sides of the form or the symmetry that I'm working with, but it also makes it possible for me to work longer hours because I'm not relying on one hand.
That's a time saver, isn't it? That's a handy trick. Double the work. And we had a question here with the lady. Yeah, on your head. Yeah. Good question again. What happens with all your shavings? Do you use them in other stages of the process?
Well, with my normal pieces, the ones which are not to do with virtues of unity, I collect them, and the idea is to recycle them because I tend to carve out, I would say roughly, if not more, a third to half the clay out. So that's a lot of clay to be carving out, so I tend to save it. With virtues of unity, all the clay that I'm carving out is then collected with each country, and then all that clay would eventually be mixed together to make one united piece.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm just going to say, you mentioned to me earlier that one of the pieces that you showed last night in the opening ceremony was 96 kilograms of clay when she started. 96 kilos of clay. But when it was carved and fired, it was 48, am I correct? Something like that?
I think that was about 52 or a bit more, that one. But the heaviest piece up until last year was about 75 to 78 kilos. But I did a piece last year, what was 92. And so that would have been roughly about, I think, about 52 to 54 kilos after, because I struggled, obviously, handling that piece, and my partner and one of the neighbours had to manoeuvre that piece every time it needed turning or moving. I mean, with the one, 75, I can just about manage to do certain things with it once it's been carved, but yeah, with that particular piece, I couldn't. But and again, it was a high-risk piece because there was a lot of clay, and it was a new form that I've never worked on, which was a spherical form with a square a rim.
Yeah.
Do you ever work on multiple pieces at once, or do you keep one, and how long do you work
I
on them?
prefer to work with one piece at a time, but I've done this just to show what it looks like before I carve into it. But yeah, I tend to work with one piece at a time, because with the clay, you know, you kind of, each time you get closer to the surface you want, the clay is constantly drying. So you want to be able to consistently work with those shapes that you're working with. With something like stone or wood, it doesn't matter. You can leave and then go back the following month, or if you have another project, what comes through. But with clay, once you start carving it, you want to carve it until it's finished.
How long does it take you to finish a piece?
It varies. This piece in front, I probably I should time myself a bit more. But between this size of shape, depending on the complexity or the difficulty of the clay, can take 80 to 200 hours, depending what kind of finish I'm doing on it or how complex the design is and stuff. So, but yeah, but between 80 and 200, I'd say. But I don't know with this one, because I don't know what finish, because there's lots of big stones in this one. So.
So we've got two questions here and one over there, so we'll start here. Okay, that's a good question. What is the point of greatest jeopardy for you apart from the firing?
So just say it again, sorry.
What is the point of greatest jeopardy for you apart from the firing? When is it at most risk?
Just the firing.
Just the firing, there we go.
That's when you kind of forget what's happening in there, and I don't know. Each process, as long as I concentrate on that process, like the making, you know, I try and eliminate all the air bubbles by carefully building the form and adding the clay into it and to the thickness, or you know, that I want, or putting the coils on. Everything's really considered when I'm doing it, and even with the mapping, I do it as closely as I can with my measuring tools. So none of that I'm nervous about once I've done it, because I do that quite carefully. The only thing I don't have control of is when it's in the kiln.
A point in truth when you said that gathering clay from different parts of the world. I mean, is it literally you're bringing some clay back in your suitcase?
So the question is how do you collect clay from different parts of the world? Do you bring it back in your suitcase, or what is the method by which you get the clay from all over the world?
Over the years, people have got me the clay, and people have sourced it in different ways. Some people have posted it, some people have bought it back as extra luggage. I mean, a friend, colleague who went to Cuba on a dancing course, bought it back in a plastic bag on a hip through customs. So when she gave me the bag of clay, it was shaped with a U shape of a hip. And that piece is in the installation. She was called Hillary, so I call the virtue Hilarity. So, you know, the names can sometimes reflect the person as well as the place the clay's from. The clay what come from Costa Rica. Someone saw the installation in Manchester Art Gallery, and she really wanted to get some clay from Costa Rica. And when she came with her family, each one of them had a lump of clay in their suitcase, which added up to about 15 kilos. So, it comes in different ways, I think, but you know.
I can imagine customs having a good look at this. Grey substances in the plastic bag.
I got some clay from Iraq last year, and one of my lecturers from Preston University, UCLan, she went out to Afghanistan because her son is a diplomat there, and I did say, oh, it'd be wonderful to have some clay from Iraq, and she goes, I doubt it, because you can't really go out much. But while she was there, she got talking to the spa manager, and he said he knew a potter and he would get her some clay, so he got some clay, and that was all great. But then when she did get to customs, the guy was chopping it with a machete to make sure there wasn't a bomb in it or anything, you know. And as he was there being quite aggressive with the clay, he's saying how much he loved pottery and did a bit himself. So in general, you know, there's all these lovely stories that I'm collecting that I want to put together, because I think it's really exciting, you know, with the clays and how they're obtained, you know, over the years of collecting them.
We have a question over there.
What is the variation
What is the variation of the wall thickness in the pre-fired piece?
The variation could be like 1 millimeter to 7-8 inches is solid, completely solid. Like it could be almost a solid foam, so it varies from super thin to super thick. So that's why the slow firing is really important. That's why working on it consistently in not an area where there's too much draft or too much heat. So consistent temperature or, you know, humidity and stuff like that is kind of important. But yeah, the varying thicknesses depend. And when you're carving from the outside in one angle and then inside in a different angle, you're constantly feeling for those kind of depths and thicknesses within the piece. So you're constantly aware. So even though it's a slow process, you're not just you're constantly feeling the inside and outside and working with them both together.
So we have two questions in the middle there. The man in the red jacket first.
What are you going to do with your monument, the shards, when you finish at the end of this?
Yes, the question is, what are you going to do with your monument of shards when this exhibition is finished?
These
The monument of shards in the exhibition, I believe.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, that was just done just to show the process of the shapes that were carved. That was done for an exhibition a few years back, and just this idea that the shards were this idea of memories that are forgotten. And my partner was thinking I was mad firing them, but I just wanted to show, because when you are carving them, people like the shapes that you carve or the angles that you carve out of the form. So I collected those series just to show the process. I mean, I've never fired any more than those pieces because I'm actually collecting the clay that I'm carving out of the different countries for the clay body that I'll make at the end of the installation eventually, when I get as many different clays.
And there was another question just behind it.
Can you tell us how you prepare the clay from its initial raw state? Because you said this one's got quite a lot of stones in it.
Yeah.
So is there a level of sieving that you go through, or what?
So how do you prepare the clay when you receive it in such a raw state? Because you've mentioned there's stones and everything in it. How do you process the clay?
With the clay, I tend to use the clay as I'm given it, if I can, if I'm really confident with it. So this Bosnian clay is directly how I've got it, and that's why it's got lots of stone in it. But this Ghanaian clay, my partner dried and then wetted down again and sieved and got all the leaf and debris out of it and stuff. So I use the clay at the various states that they're given. So if I'm confident with it, I will, which is majority of them, that I tend to use as they come. And some of the clay have been bought, let's say the South African clay that was dug out from a seabed, and it had all sorts in it. So that was, I did refine that. My partner went through all the stages and did that for me. But this garden clay is used directly as it comes from the ground, and the Emmentaler clay from Switzerland, that was from a farmer's backyard, and that was used directly as it came. And the Cuban clay, when I was carving, that had plastic and donkey hairs in it, and that was used directly from the ground. But other clays have been refined, and they're at different levels. You know, whether it's a local potter and he's refined it to a certain level, or some have been, you know, super refined by manufacturers, but the clay itself has come from that country. So I work at different levels of states that the clay's received.
There must be a lot of wedging involved.
My partner does all that.
Portable pug mill.
We have one last question. I believe it's here. So, oh, two. We'll go for two. One here. Yep.
How will you know when the piece is finished?
How will you know when the piece is finished?
The installation?
Yeah.
When I've got all the clays, where possible clay is able to be obtained, then I would have finished it. So it's a long project. It started in 2009 and it's still going. And I think as the installation gets more momentum, you know, the more venues that have it, and the idea and what the installation is about, and it's then it will travel a lot more, and it will. I mean, it's been to the Yale in America. So the idea is to travel the installation to lots of different countries and different establishments with this idea and the message that that I'm trying to portray with it.
So you must spend a lot of time organizing exhibitions and shipping and boxing or storage at your place?
Well, no, the venue normally sorts all that out. So but yeah, no, I am going to spend more time. I think the installation was showing. It'd been shown in quite a few venues, and then one of the last places before COVID was Manchester, and there it got so much momentum in the reaction and the responses that were given, and then COVID happened, and it went a bit still. So now this year is the first year it's been shown again. So it's in 3 different venues around the country this year. But the idea is to work with someone on pushing it further. So.
One last question, and I'm sure Halima will be happy to answer any questions when she's back in her demonstration space, but we've one last question here from the man in green. Yep, that's you.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
No, I was just saying, when you process the clay that you get, if you have clay that's refined and you think that it might be susceptible to cracking or breaking in the forming process or even in the cutting process, do you add drug to it to make it more resilient?
So the question is, when you're working with refined clay that might be more sustainable to cracking, do you actually add grog to it to make it more resilient?
Yes, definitely. I add grog or malachite, or sometime with this particular clay, with the garden clay, I've added ball clay into it because it had no plastic. This clay has a lot of plastic, so it varies. So this one didn't have any plastic. The clays that I've struggled with most, which are in the installation, is the clay from Pakistan, which I had to make about 3 times before it was successful because it was cracking as it was drying. And same, there's a Welsh clay in there which I really struggled working with, and again I added various things, grog and ball clay, and that one again I had to make a few times because once it started cracking I had to then reconstitute it, and I've just been given some more Welsh clay which I was hoping to have done another piece, but again it wasn't behaving itself, so I didn't manage. And that was from Borth, which is not too far from here. So yeah, I do add things if I feel like it needs adding, or I'm not at all confident with it.
And I'd like to point out, just to end our fantastic demonstration, and so kind of you to give us all your wonderful shared wisdom there, but the virtue for Wales is valour. There we go. Thank you very much, everybody. That's the end of today's demonstration. Thank you. Thank you. There'll be a lunch break now before Demonstrations resume after lunch.